This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 223 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about what you can do when you do a check for understanding in class and all you get is a blank stare. It's definitely happened to me. I've seen it in plenty of other classrooms, and I bet it's happened to many people listening too. You've taught something, explained it, given examples, and so on, and then you ask the class a question, a check for understanding, and nothing happens. You get a blank stare from the whole class. What went wrong? It's the kind of thing that can baffle even experienced teachers. To help us understand what might be causing it and how we can prevent it from happening again, I've invited Blake Harvard to join me. I have been following Blake's work for quite a few years now. He's an AP psychology teacher in Madison, Alabama, and since 2016, he's been writing about the connection between cognitive science and learning on his excellent blog, The Effortful Educator. When I decided to tackle this problem of the blank stare, I suspected Blake would be a good person to talk to. And he didn't disappoint. He's written a fantastic post over on Cult of Pedagogy that explores 4 research-based explanations for why the blank stare happens, along with action steps teachers can take to solve those problems. In today's episode, he's going to break it down for us. Before I play our conversation, I'd like to thank EduBadges for sponsoring this episode. Are you seeking a professional development experience that truly resonates with your teaching journey? Discover EduBadges, your destination for personalized, flexible learning. Choose from a library of over 270 badges aligned with the ISTE standards for educators. Whether you're looking to enhance classroom engagement, integrate technology, or sharpen those Tier 1 instruction skills, EduBadges covers it all. It's straightforward. Select badges that align with your goals, learn at your own pace, and celebrate your progress. Each badge you earn is not just a symbol of achievement, but a stepping stone toward practical classroom applications and improved student outcomes. And every badge you earn can be redeemed for valuable contact hours or even graduate credit. Visit EduBadges today, that's EDGEUBADGES, and use the code CULT for $20 off a premium account. Join EduBadges now, where your passion for teaching meets the joy of learning. Support also comes from the Modern Classrooms Project, which empowers educators to meet every student's needs. Created by educators for educators, the Modern Classrooms Project can help you create your own instructional videos, design structures to support self-paced learning, and ensure that each of your students achieves mastery. Join their free online course to learn the basics, or sign up for their virtual mentorship program, where their experts will prepare you to launch a modern classroom of your own. If you're ready to transform teaching, visit modernclassrooms.org to start learning now. Now here's my conversation with Blake Harvard about the blank stare. We've been sort of like loosely connected through Twitter for I don't know even how many years. We've always sort of bounced back and forth. We've talked about doing other guest posts and it never got going. And now I'm realizing it's because you're such a faster worker than I am.
Oh,
that you be like, okay, here's the idea. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. I work so much slower than you. Now that I've seen your running times, I realize that you're fast in so many other ways. So Blake Harvard, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you have had a blog for a long time called The Effortful Educator.
Yes, about 7 or 8 years, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about what kind of work you do and about your site.
Sure. So most of my stuff is in the realm of that I'm writing about, reading about is in the realm of cognitive psychology, applying what research seems to say are more effective practices for learning. About 7 or 8 years ago, I stumbled upon The Learning Scientist, and I mean, their stuff was so clearly and cleanly written, and it made so much sense to me, as an educator. And I realized I was probably doing the bells and whistles things, and I hadn't stopped to consider the efficiency or the effectiveness of doing all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. When I started reading their stuff, it just seemed, I don't know. I appreciated that it was based in research, obviously, but I also appreciated how much simpler, just as a teacher, it made the job feel, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I really liked that. And before I knew it, one of the learning scientists at the time was asking me to write for them and a guest blog, and I did that, and that it was over from that point. Like I realized, man, I really love doing this. So I started reading some, research, thinking about how I would apply it in my class, writing about that, and that, for the most part, that's been 7 or 8 years of writing.
Yeah, and your stuff is really, really good. That's why I wanted to kind of like talk about your site first before we get into today's topic, just because when I approached you for this topic, um, I couldn't think of anybody who would be a better fit, because your stuff is very much tightly focused on classroom practice as it applies to cognitive psychology. And that is, it's a little bit of your background too. You teach AP Psych, correct?
Yes, correct. I'm at the high school level. I teach AP
Mm-hmm.
psychology, all of my classes, all day, every day. So I'm very lucky. Yeah, that obviously helped, but I'm very lucky that I get to teach this. Like, this is the stuff I write about is literally in my curriculum,
Yeah.
to talk about to students about how they to learn better, study stuff like that. So um, that's obviously a bonus there.
Yeah. So I wanted to start by just encouraging people to go visit your site, because you've got years and years of really good stuff there. But the thing I approached you about, and this came from an observation that I did, where I was watching a class by a veteran teacher, and she taught this lesson, seemed pretty, clean in terms of the kids seemed to be kind of following along. And then she asked a question that was sort of like a check for understanding, what about this situation? And the entire class just blankly stared at her, and she looked so perplexed by it.
Yeah.
And I've seen this before. I've seen other teachers do this, and I think it's a really common thing. And you've written a guest post now about it called, we're referring to this now as the stare, just the
The stare.
students. Yeah. When they just kind of stare at you. And I think for a lot of teachers, we're sort of stuck there. We don't know what to do. And since I know that you deal a lot in the cognitive aspect of teaching, I thought you'd be a perfect person to help us understand what's going on, or what could potentially be going on,
Right. Yeah.
and
Definitely.
what the explanation is for that. And so what teachers can do to prevent it, reduce it,
Yeah.
mitigate the problem. So you came up with, we've got 4 possible explanations for what's going
Possible.
on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, from the cognitive standpoint, some things popped into mind that could be occurring, but as every teacher knows, an individual student, the stare could be caused by a student just having a bad day or something at home not going
Mm,
well, and it may not necessarily have anything to do with the 4 things we're going to talk about.
mm,
So it can go beyond this, right? Cognitive psychology isn't everything in the classroom, but um, it can help to explain some things, I guess, right?
yeah.
Some scenarios, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that you mentioned that. These are definitely not the only explanations, but these are
Sure.
definitely some things to look into if you find that you're thinking, I taught this perfectly. I feel like it's clear what's going on. Maybe these are some things to look
Sure.
at. So what's the first potential explanation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I also want to say that the 4, they kind of run together, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
one can feed off of another. And I think teachers, if this comes across clearly, will kind of understand that. So our students are novices, right? When it comes to what we're teaching, for the most part, right? When we're teaching them new concepts, um, and novice learners, they don't have really well developed schemas or like understandings for the concept as a whole. So every time they're hearing new information, it's literally new information, and the brain can struggle when the brain doesn't have anything to kind of associate that with, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that makes it much more difficult for students to retain information, right? And this a thread that's going to come through this the whole time is that as teachers, we're biased like any other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have our own biases, and to a degree, it's kind of this understanding of like, well, I said it. It made sense to me, right? It seemed logical to me.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't they get it, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that's probably normal for every person, but constantly as teachers, we instruct students, we're constantly put in these situations,
Right.
where this made sense to me. This is the way I learned it myself, perhaps, or whatever. So why don't you get it? Why didn't you retain it? Right?
Could you so you use the term schema, and
Yeah,
probably a lot of people listening know that, but just in case they're kind of new to that term, give us
sure.
a little bit more of an idea of what you mean
Yeah,
by schema.
certainly. Yeah. So a schema, it's almost like I kind of it says in the blog post or in the article, like it's kind of like a spider web of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
right? I refer to that. So if you think about a well-developed spider web, right, that's going to catch a lot of bugs. It's got a lot of strands, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the strands are connected, and it can get kind of complex. Well, the brain kind of retains information like that, and we don't like store an individual memory all by itself, right? It's connected to the context. It's connected to what we also think about. When I think about this subject, whatever it is, whatever is being taught, what does that remind me of, or what can I relate that to? And all of those things are interconnected, right? And the more kind of connections we have with our memories, the stronger those memories are, and the more complex and the more sophisticated our schemas or understanding for that concept will be.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking with students and we're teaching them new information, they may not have that spider web, or their spider web may be quite frail, right? Not a lot of connections. So, just to keep kind of the analogy going, it's hard to catch new information if your spider web of knowledge or your schema isn't well developed.
Right.
Whereas, again, as teachers, we're teaching with a well-developed schema about this information or understanding of this information. So it's easier for us to add new information to that. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're starting from zero on whatever, a concept or whatever you're teaching in class, it's hard to add to nothing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So for each one of these potential explanations for what's going on, you've also provided some possible solutions, possible things that teachers can do to mitigate for that problem. So what would you advise teachers to do to sort of counteract this inadequate schema development that we've got for the first explanation?
Right. So, I guess first realizing that until you've been through the topic, the concept, there's not a lot you can do about that information. But what you can do is help to try to address background knowledge or related knowledge that they may already have that may relate. So they may not know specifically about the subject being taught, but if there's this kind of like parallel understanding or event or background knowledge that they have that they can relate that new information to, that can help to catch the new knowledge, so to speak. So accessing background knowledge is key, right? So before you get into a new topic, again, you don't have to ask them specifically about that topic itself, but a related topic that they may relate to. Sports or music or whatever. And then as the teacher, you're going to kind of connect the dots there as to how one thing is like this other thing. And that can help to kind of access a spider web or a schema that they can attach these new ideas to.
How do you feel about KWL charts, the know, want to know, and then I guess the learning after is supposed to go in that last column? That was the first thing I thought of when I saw this activating of prior knowledge. Is that one way of doing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's like anything else in education. It's easy to make things complicated really quickly when sometimes they don't need to be too complicated. But, anytime you're getting students to think and apply, right? Even if it's in a pre-testing kind of situation or in an accessing background knowledge, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
see that as a good thing from a cognitive standpoint. But, hey, we're about to talk about, in my class, we've just finished talking about sensation. So we've talked about how we see vision and hearing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, a KWL chart could be something with, hey, what do you already know about this, right? What do you want to know about how we see and the brain works together with that, right? And things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But anything to bring up ideas again that are parallel to those ideas, or like in a KWL chart, maybe not parallel, but specific to what do we already know about this.
Right.
And what's something that's so key about doing this, again, it could be a pretest or anything to access background knowledge before getting into a topic. I think the whole group discussion surrounding it is just as important,
Yeah.
right? Because a student may not realize that they have background knowledge or they can relate this to something they already know, right? The two subjects may be so separate to them, but if another student in the class brings it up, there's that kind of that insight, that aha moment of, oh yeah, now I
Mm-hmm.
get it. Or like, so by accessing others' background knowledge, it can assist other students with accessing their background knowledge on a topic,
Right.
right? And that, and then from another standpoint, that just can get students much more interested in whatever you're getting ready to teach anyway, right?
Yeah.
Which is also always a bonus for motivation to stay with it.
Right. And that'll help to develop those schemas.
Sure.
You in the post, you've mentioned this a couple times just in these last few minutes, this idea of pre-testing, and you've actually got a link out to one of your articles about pre-testing, which
Right.
also links out to other research. And this stuff was a surprise to me. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about this, about the idea of pre-testing even on knowledge they don't have can actually really produce significantly better learning. Talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So I somewhat recently, I've really gotten into the idea of pre-testing, right? We always
Mhm.
think of like a post-test, right? I just taught
Right.
this, so let me, exit ticket, something like that, right? But pre-testing, and this is, to me as a teacher, this is fascinating on many different levels. But so first, even, a pre-test, again, true, false, multiple choice
Mhm.
essay, it doesn't really matter too much. Um, the cool thing about a pretest is that the students are going to probably get a lot of it wrong,
Mhm.
right? But the thing you've got to tell your students and talk to them about is that it doesn't matter that you get it wrong.
Mhm.
Kind of what you're doing with a pretest is you're kind of priming the brain for like, okay, this information's coming, right? And what some research is finding is that you take a pretest before. A lot of the research is done in college, right, with college students. But you take a pretest before on a subject, um, but then during the lecture or during the class, you kind of key into those, like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that earlier, right?
Mhm.
So it kind of keys you into like, oh yeah, this must be important. I was asked about this earlier, right? So I
Yeah.
probably need to know this.
Mhm.
So, and you're more likely to pick up on it and more likely to see it as an important aspect of whatever's being taught. And then that leads to a better chance of remembering. Again, the pretest, while it's not accessing background knowledge, right, it's kind of priming those schemas to be ready to catch the new knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Or if you want to think about it this way, um, kind of telling the spider web what to catch,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Just
Which
creating
is
like containers for stuff that isn't there yet.
right. So and it's I tell my students, and this is just part of being a good learner overall. This idea that I'm going to get it wrong. I don't even want to attempt it because I'm going to get it wrong. Students are we've kind of set them up for, forgetting is bad, right? But forgetting
Mm.
is normal. It's okay to not know things. So just getting students to realize, hey, you're taking this assessment, you're going to do poorly on it, but that's okay, right? That's not
Mhm.
even the goal of the assessment, really, of this pretest. It's just to kind of get your brain ready for here's what we're about to learn. Realizing also, another aspect of this is, hey, I got whatever 4 of these 5 questions wrong. I don't know this,
Mm.
so I need to pay attention,
Yeah.
right? Students will get in the mind frame of I already know all this stuff, right?
Right.
Well, the pretest doesn't lie. If you knew it, you would have gotten it right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot. There's more and more literature coming out on the benefits, direct benefits, but kind of the indirect, unconscious almost benefits of student learning with pretesting. Actually, myself and another one of my colleagues at my high school are working with Dr. Nick Soderstrom,
Hmm.
who's a cognitive psychologist. I believe he's at the University of Montana. And we're setting up to do some pre-testing research next year
Oh,
in
that's
our
great.
classes, kind of looking at different aspects of pre-testing and how it leads to benefits on summative assessments, right? Does
Yeah.
the pre-tested information, the stuff I pre-test, does that knowledge carry over all the way a week or two perhaps to the summative assessment compared to things that aren't pre-tested?
Mm.
Um, so we're getting ready to look into that, which is really cool.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. So if anybody listening is really interested in this topic, when you go to the blog post, um, Blake has got the word pre-testing hyperlinked, and it's going to go over to his site where you can see a lot of that that research. You know, the other research that you link to over from your site, they talk about mind wandering and how pre-testing
Mm,
sort of fixes mind wandering. They tested how many times students sort of zoned out during a lecture, and if they had been pre-tested, it
mhm.
reduced that dramatically also. So
Yeah.
anybody who's upset about their kids kind of spacing out or whatever, that
Yeah.
it can kind of solve for that. This is really exciting.
Oh, it's
uh,
it's really cool, right? Like
yeah.
when you get down into it, I think a lot of teachers are just nerds about all of this, right? Like,
Yes, absolutely.
I want to know the inner workings of all of this, and it's also fascinating. Yes, I love
Yeah.
it.
I had a thing that I went to one time. I think it was a professional development, and they gave us something that was supposed to be like a pretest. I think it was just an image with a lot of words, and they wanted us to write down as much as we knew from there. And it was a lot of stuff that we'd never seen. But I remember something they said after we sort of frustratingly tried to like assemble some sort of knowledge. They said, by the time this next hour is done, you're going to know most of these words. And that was super motivating.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It kind of
Yeah,
takes a little bit of that frustration away from like the kids who are just like, this is a test. I can't believe I'm not doing well. And it's just like, you're going to know
sure.
this stuff really
You're going to know
soon.
this, right?
Yeah.
And if you wanted to take that pretest kind of, to the next level, there is um, turn that pretest from today into almost like a bell ringer tomorrow, right?
Oh, yeah.
And your students will probably see a market increase, right, in
Mm-hmm.
what they got gained from one day to the next,
Yeah.
and that can be eye opening for students, right? Because we don't explicitly talk to our students about, like, look, here's growth and learning right here, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
it's hard for them to see something that's not so concrete sometimes, right? So sometimes we need to
Mm-hmm.
help to make it concrete for them, and that this is
Yeah.
one way to do that.
I love that. Okay, so that was our very first explanation, which is kind of a big one: inadequate schema development. The second explanation you've got is limited working memory. So let's talk about that.
Certainly. Yeah. So because because our students are human, what we know about memory processing is that our working memory is limited. Now, depending on research, there's research back, I believe, in the 1960s by Dr. George Miller that said something to the effect of 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information. So talking about like how much information can I hold in my memory at any, kind of one time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how much can I process? Because that is limited. And that's your working memory, by the way, right? Whatever you're working with, whatever you're thinking about at this time, is what's in your working memory, right? So, like if I asked you what you had for breakfast and you access that memory, that is now in your working memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's limited. We can't just hold an infinite amount of information there
Right.
and hope that it gets stored into our long-term memory.
Mm-hmm.
And for the novice learners with kind of inadequate schemas,
Mm-hmm.
that working memory is very easily taxed or overwhelmed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and when we're presenting a new topic or a new concept, if we present too much too fast and don't allow for processing, it can become overloaded. And then, well, you see frustration in students. It might result in the stare, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because while you're on step 4 or 5, they're still trying to get through steps 1 and 2 on a
Right.
topic, right?
Right.
And this is kind of easy to see if you think about, again, anything that you know a lot about as a human being, right? Um, and if you heard someone talk about it, and an expert talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you already know something about that topic, it's easier for you to already relate that information again to what this expert is telling you about it.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you don't know anything about it, it's all foreign to you, right? It could almost be
Right.
in a different language, and you're not going to know any of it, and you're very quickly overwhelmed, and you very quickly cannot process almost anything that's being
Mm-hmm.
spoken or seen. Um, so you got to know, again, that your students are novices. Their working memory is limited. So number one, how you present the information, but also the amount of information you're presenting is also key,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. So then that leads us to the solution. So if we're having a problem with overloading their working memory, what we can do is what?
Yeah, I mean, again, teachers know this, right? But kind of sometimes it helps to know why we're doing what we were told to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But a very simple thing to do is just to chunk the information,
Mm-hmm.
right? Break it down into more meaningful bits of information, and then work through. Again, if obviously I'm making this up, if it's an 8-step process, rather than going through
Mm-hmm.
all 8 and then telling our students, okay, let's do all 8, right? Let's do 1
Right.
and 2 together, and let's assess what we know about that. Let's do 3 and 4 together, right? So on and so forth along the way, right? We chunk information like all the time, and we don't even realize it, right?
Right.
Our like phone numbers are 10 digits, right? And if you just had to remember 10 digits,
Yeah.
you couldn't do it. But the way we chunk them together and say those numbers makes it a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier for us. Same thing with our social security numbers and things like that.
Right.
There's a reason we do that from a cognitive standpoint. It's not, just chance that it happens.
Yeah.
But, so in thinking of it like that, again, apply that to what your students are hearing or seeing in class. If I told you a new phone number and I just told you 10 random digits, you'd be like,
Mm.
what were those?
Yeah.
What? No,
Yeah.
that's your students in class, right?
Yes.
It's 10 random digits to them, kind of,
Yeah.
right? So you need to break it down and chunk the information, and practice the information again along the way before putting the whole process together, I guess.
Yes. Yes. Excellent. Okay. Explanation number 3 is the curse of knowledge. What is
Right.
that?
Yeah. So I've already I mentioned this earlier with our biases, right? Again, we're
Mm-hmm.
human, we have biases. And the curse of knowledge is just basically, hey, I know this, I understand it, I understood it when I said it, right? Or when I
Mm-hmm.
wrote it down or whatever. Why don't you get it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it made sense to me. Why don't you get it? And again, that part of this is still going back into the limited working memory and into the underdeveloped schemas. And then you throw in the curse of knowledge of a teacher. And again, I am a teacher, right? And I know that I do this too,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one of the best things to kind of combat the curse of knowledge is to understand that I am a human and I may display this kind of bias. Um, but understanding again that these students are hearing this for the very first time, and you probably didn't get it the very first time either, or the
Mm-hmm.
second time, or maybe the third time, right? So, and the way we may want to teach the students, or the way we understand it, may not be the way they understand it necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So in reality, it's kind of an empathizing, it's kind of just a patience with the students, and realizing that, for the most part, they want to get it right. Like,
Right.
they're not here choosing to get it wrong on purpose, right? Like,
Yes.
people generally don't enjoy getting things wrong. So they're trying to get it right. But just because it made sense to us doesn't mean it necessarily makes sense to them the first time.
Right.
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 Yeah.
You know what I have found to be a super helpful exercise for that, I think, especially for a teacher that's been doing the same topic for a long time and has kind of lived their lives kind of on a routine, would
Right.
be to take a class or do something where you are actually trying to learn something new, ballroom dancing, some kind of cooking thing. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden you've got that beginner's mind and it's just
Sure.
like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
really humbling.
Definitely. Oh yeah. Anything. Right. Like, have your students talk about their favorite game, right?
Yes. Have them try to teach you something.
And they don't realize it, but man, they know a lot of stuff about those games that they're really into, right?
Yeah.
And just see how quickly all of a sudden you are overwhelmed with the information of this character versus this character and what they're trying to do
Hmm.
and what the game is like. It'll get your head spinning really quickly, right? And then again, and realize that that's kind of the position our students are in daily when we're presenting new information.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then the fourth explanation is single modality teaching. This could be another problem that's causing these kids to blank out. What is single modality teaching?
So we're talking about how are I think about it, how are the students receiving this information, right? Are they
Mm-hmm.
hearing it? Are they seeing it? Are they doing something with it? That sort of thing. And I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else, right? But like as a teacher, I like to talk through my understanding of it,
Mm-hmm.
of the topics, of the concepts. And that's okay, but that just means that my students are just hearing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while that's okay, right? There's a much easier, well, there are better ways of getting students to understand. So instead of using that single modality of hearing, audition,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's also let them see it, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of in cognitive psychology, this is called dual coding,
Mm-hmm.
meaning not only am I going to assign words to this, what
Mm-hmm.
this to this concept, but I'm going to see it also,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that can be in a graphic organizer, it can be in illustrations, really anything that can add context. Because when we add context to a topic, we're adding more of a chance, I guess, a likelihood that it will get caught by the
Mm-hmm.
spider web there, that the schema can attach to it, right? And oftentimes, especially with illustrations, oftentimes when we add that illustration and then they come back to needing to access that memory, it's the illustration that they
Yes.
access. It's not our
Yes.
spoken words, right?
Right.
They think about that drawing perhaps they made or what I put on the board, right? And as it says in the article, it doesn't necessarily have to be literally a picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be a hierarchy. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love hierarchy, so the students can see how the information connects to each other, right? How one
Right. Yep.
concept connects to another, right? I mean, graphic organizers, right? I love to provide my students with graphic organizers so they can see how the information fits together. And like I said, when it's time to access that memory, they're probably not going to think about the words I spoke, but what did it
Mm-hmm.
look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of single modality, just hearing it, adding that
Yeah.
visual aspect to understanding is huge also.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of works in the other direction too. Sometimes if a teacher is only assigning a whole bunch of reading and no one's ever really talking about it or
Ooh,
making those connections in conversation, it can kind of be the same way. It's just a lot of words looking at them and they're not really um, having conversations. I've also seen some research on just the value of a word wall, where especially if the kids are learning a lot of new vocabulary in the content area, to just have some of those key vocabulary words up because they're not familiar with them, and sometimes you can
right.
hear an instructor say the words but you can't picture it, and so
Sure.
to even have the word someplace to look at can help you make more of those connections.
Definitely, yeah. So like seeing the word, and of course, adding maybe an illustration of what that
Mm-hmm.
word means, or have the
Yeah.
students design their own, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'll have students that'll get stuck on this, and they'll say, "Well, I'm not a good artist, right? I can't
Yeah.
draw." And it's not the quality of the work that your brain's going to latch onto, right?
Yeah.
It's what it is. And again, some of my students I'll see them taking a test or an assessment, and they'll start almost like laughing a little bit.
Yeah.
And what they're thinking back to is how horrible their drawing was,
Right.
right? And how goofy it was, and how they showed their friend sitting next to them and they both laughed about it, right? But they still accessed that memory and could use that
Exactly.
information, and that was the goal, right? So, it's not about how good the artist is. It's about what that means to you, right?
Yeah.
As the student, and that helps to access it. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully this is going to help some people get themselves out of that stare. And Blake Harvard, where can people find you online to learn more from you?
So I'm on Twitter. I will still
Mhm.
remain to call it Twitter at
Same.
Effortful Educator, right?
Okay.
Website effortfuleducator.com. And I'm on Facebook. You can look me up too there, the Effortful Educator. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm out there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really hope I can have you back again because you've got a lot of really good stuff for teachers, and it's kind of embarrassing that it took me this long to have you on here. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
To read Blake's post, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 223. To get a bi-monthly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.